Under the glow of a chandelier older than the town itself, Jacob Miller realized the room had fallen silent because of him, and not in a way any man would want. Walter Whitmore's voice cracked through the hush like a rifle shot. If he can't even explain this clause, how the hell is he supposed to protect our daughter? The accusation hung between them, heavy, humiliating, deliberate. Jacob felt every pair of eyes on his back, Rebecca's family, the estate attorney, even the maid carrying a tray of untouched coffee. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched the schoolteacher from the wrong side of Ohio stand alone in a mansion built on old steel money. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before a storm breaks. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He saw Rebecca shift slightly beside her father, her fingers tightening around the back of a leather chair. She wasn't defending him. She wasn't even breathing. She was assessing, calculating, deciding whether she would step toward him or away. Walter placed both palms on the table, leaning forward, until the gold rim of his glasses flashed. You want to join this family, son? Then you prove you understand what you're signing. Behind him, his wife, Marianne, watched with a smile that never touched her eyes, the polite, polished kind older women wore at country clubs just before tearing someone apart with a sentence. Jacob looked down at the prenup papers spread across the polished mahogany. Lines of dense legal language stared back at him, neat black print on cream parchment, a document that smelled of money power and suspicion. He had reviewed an earlier draft with his attorney, but this new version had arrived tonight without warning. Sudden additions, thickened protections, subtle traps. It wasn't illegal, just cruel. He inhaled slowly. The house was so quiet, he could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall like a heartbeat. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice soft, threaded with embarrassment. Dad, maybe this is too much for one night. Let him. This is essential. Walter cut in, barely glancing at her. Legacy matters, Rebecca. You know that. Then turning back to Jacob with a cold steadiness. Your world doesn't include trusts, foundations, or generational holdings. Ours does. If you want in, you sign understanding every line. The insult was dressed in formality, but the meaning was sharp enough to draw blood. Jacob closed his eyes for one beat, just long enough to bury the first flash of anger. He reminded himself why he was here. Because he loved Rebecca. Because she had understood his grief when so few bothered. Because she had once knelt beside his son Ben at the county fair and tied a loose shoelace with such tenderness that Jacob thought maybe, just maybe, life was giving him another beginning. But tonight felt different. Tonight she looked like a woman torn in half, one side reaching toward Jacob, the other chained to the Whitmore dynasty. He lifted his head. I'm not confused, he said, quietly, but this isn't the agreement we negotiated. Consider it an update, Walter replied, settling back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had never lost a negotiation in his life. Jacob studied him. The tailored suit, the lacquered, calm, the air of someone who had built fortunes and buried competitors. Walter Whitmore wasn't unkind by accident. His cruelty had purpose testing, measuring, dissecting. Marianne leaned forward. We simply want to ensure everything is clear, Jacob. Her tone was gentle, but her fingers tapped the armrest in a slow, irritated rhythm. Our daughter has worked very hard to build her career. She deserves security. Security. The word pulsed through the room like a warning siren. Then the estate attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, Section 9, is the primary concern. It outlines the stewardship expectations in the event of unexpected responsibilities within the family holdings. Jacob frowned. Stewardship expectations. That wasn't in the original draft. No. The attorney admitted adjusting his tie. It was added earlier this evening. And there it was. A bait and switch done under antique lighting. Jacob felt something shift in the room, an undercurrent of unease. The maid, who had been inching toward the doorway, froze mid-step eyes, flicking between the family and their guest. Even the attorney avoided meeting Jacob's gaze. Rebecca finally stepped closer to him. Her eyes were glossy, her breath shallow. "Jacob, can we talk?" But her father's hand rose before she could finish a swift, silencing gesture. "You can talk after he signs," Walter said. The temperature in Jacob's chest dropped several degrees. He felt the loneliness of the moment, the weight of his late wife Anna's locket in his pocket, and the dull ache of knowing his son was home with a neighbor because he'd believed tonight was important, believed he was walking toward a future instead of a trap. He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped lightly across the hardwood. No, Jacob said each syllable steady, almost gentle. "We talk now." That was when the twist surfaced. Rebecca's brother, Daniel Whitmore, who had been silent all night, suddenly stood. He was older than Rebecca by a handful of years, quiet, observant, with eyes that saw more than he ever commented on. He picked up the revised prenup, flipped through it once, and muttered, "Dad, this isn't what we agreed on." Walter stiffened. "Sit down, Daniel." But Daniel didn't. Instead, he walked behind Jacob's chair, placed the papers in front of his father, and tapped a single paragraph with his index finger. "This clause. You didn't show it to me. And it contradicts the board's ethics policy." Marianne's smile faltered. The maid backed another step, nearly bumping into the doorframe. Rebecca looked between her father and brother, confusion rising like a tide. Jacob watched silently. A new tension crackled in the air, old fractures in the Whitmore family rising to the surface, long-buried disagreements exposed by one document. Daniel Walter warned, "This is not your place." "Then whose place is it?" Daniel asked softly. "Because it sure as hell isn't yours anymore." The room froze. Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth. Marianne whispered Daniel's name in disbelief. For the first time all evening, Jacob saw fear in Walter's eyes, small, controlled, but real. A man accustomed to absolute authority, suddenly facing a challenge from within. The estate attorney looked down in panic. Jacob didn't know what history simmered beneath the surface of this family power struggles, disagreements about the direction of the Whitmore Foundation or something darker, but he felt the ground shift. The prenup wasn't just a test for him. It was a battlefield for them. Daniel took a breath, then spoke directly to Jacob. "I don't know what my father told you, but this family isn't as united as it looks." Rebecca shut her eyes, as if bracing for an impact she'd been expecting for years. Jacob felt the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. He didn't know whether to stay seated or walk out of the mansion altogether. He didn't know if he was witnessing a fracture or an unveiling. All he knew was this nothing in the Whitmore house was what it seemed, and someone in this family had just revealed a truth that would change the course of everything that came next. Daniel's words were still hanging in the air when the grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, the chimes echoing like distant warning bells through the Whitmore estate. Walter's face hardened, first the kind of slow, controlled tightening that came from decades of boardroom battles. His voice, when it finally emerged, was low enough to make the chandelier crystals tremble. "We will not," he said, "air this family's disagreements in front of a guest." Daniel didn't flinch. "He's not a guest, Dad. He's marrying Rebecca. Or did you forget that part when you rewrote half the agreement? The estate attorney shifted uncomfortably, his pen clicking in a nervous rhythm. Marianne exhaled sharply, then stood from her chair with the quiet grace of a woman used to managing disasters before they spread. "This isn't productive," she murmured. "We need a moment alone, as a family." Jacob pushed back his chair again, slowly this time, feeling the tension ripple outward, like heat from a furnace. "If you need privacy, I'll step outside," he said. But something in Rebecca's eyes, fear or maybe a plea, held him in place. "No," she said quickly. "Stay." Her voice was tight but resolute. For the first time that night, she didn't look torn between two worlds. She looked like someone desperate for truth to be spoken aloud. Walter ignored her. "Daniel," he said, "you will sit down. Now." But Daniel remained standing, his gaze steady, almost unnervingly calm. "You're using the prenup to force control," he said. "Not just over Rebecca, over every part of this family, the foundation, the holdings, even Mum. And now you're trying to drag Jacob into the middle of it." Rebecca's breath caught. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" He turned toward her, something softening in his expression. "You really don't see it, do you? Dad's been shifting assets, restructuring the trusts, consolidating authority. He didn't add that clause tonight for fun. He added it because someone on the board challenged him last week, and he's making sure no outsider, especially someone who isn't from a legacy family, ever gets near influence." The estate attorney stood abruptly. "This conversation is inappropriate," he snapped. But he didn't sound confident. His eyes were darting around the room, calculating the political fallout. Jacob watched silently, feeling the ground tilt beneath him. He had known he didn't belong in this house. He hadn't known the house itself was cracking. Walter's voice rose like a thunderclap. "Enough." Marianne touched her husband's arm. "Walter, please." But he pulled away. "I said enough. Daniel, you and I will discuss this later. We're discussing it now." Daniel replied, "Unless you're afraid Jacob might find out what you've been hiding." Marianne went pale. Rebecca whispered her brother's name again, this time barely audible. The attorney took a step back. Jacob felt a strange stillness settle inside him. He was no stranger to conflict, but this was a family war dressed in silk and crystal. He didn't belong here, but he was already inside the blast radius. "If this is about me," he said carefully, "I don't want to be a source of division." Walter shot him a scathing look. "You already are." Rebecca gasped. Daniel shook his head in disgust. "You blame everyone but yourself," he said. "Let's tell him the truth, or I will." Walter's jaw flexed. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he said, "You wouldn't dare." Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. Last quarter's audit, the missing funds, the restructuring, the offshore transfers. Marianne's hand flew to her mouth. Rebecca staggered back a step. Jacob's heartbeat kicked into his throat. The attorney whispered, "Daniel, don't." Daniel straightened slowly. "Dad is under investigation. Quietly. No one on the outside knows yet. Not the press, not the partners, not the donors, but the board knows. And if Jacob marries Rebecca without protections, Dad thinks it could jeopardize the optics of the foundation." The room seemed to inhale all at once. Walter slammed a fist onto the table. Coffee cups rattled. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," Daniel said. "And so does Mom. And so does your attorney." His gaze moved to the man who had been silent for several minutes. The attorney swallowed hard. Rebecca's voice broke through the tension, cracking slightly at the edges. "Dad," she whispered, "is any of this true?" Walter didn't speak. His silence was louder than any denial. Rebecca's eyes filled not with tears, but with something colder, betrayal deep and sharp. "You used my wedding," she said quietly as a shield. Walter stepped toward her, desperation cutting through his pride. "Rebecca, sweetheart, you don't understand how these things work. The foundation needs stability. Optics matter. I'm protecting the family." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "You're protecting yourself." Rebecca turned to Jacob, her face stricken. "I didn't know," she murmured. "I swear I didn't know." Jacob nodded once. He believed her. But belief didn't erase the weight pressing down on him. The attorney cleared his throat, voice trembling. "This isn't the time to unravel the entire structure of the family holdings. We should adjourn," Walter snapped. "No one leaves this room." But Jacob had already reached for his coat, draped over the back of his chair. "I'm leaving," he said softly. "This isn't my fight." Rebecca grabbed his arm. "Jacob, please." He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face, half lit by chandelier, light half drowned in shadows. She looked terrified of losing him, of losing her family, of learning her entire world had cracks deep enough to swallow her. Daniel stepped forward. "Jacob, wait." Jacob paused, hand tightening around the collar of his coat. "There's something else you need to know," Daniel said. "It's about the board seat." Walter's head snapped up. "Daniel." But Daniel continued. "The board wants to appoint someone new to oversee the foundation's community initiatives. Someone with a clean reputation. Someone with a public image rooted in service, not wealth." His gaze held Jacob's. "Someone like you." Jacob froze. The attorney whispered, "Daniel, for God's sake." But Daniel spoke over him. Dad wanted the prenup tightened because he was terrified the board might offer that seat to you after the wedding. He's afraid you'd uncover everything. Rebecca staggered as if someone had struck her. "Dad, is that true?" Walter closed his eyes. His silence was an answer enough. Jacob let out a slow breath. The shock didn't come in a single wave. It seeped into him, heavy cold. They didn't just doubt him. They feared him. Not because he was poor, but because he couldn't be controlled. Rebecca stepped between Jacob and her father, her shoulders squared, voice trembling but firm. "Dad, if you manipulated my engagement to protect yourself, then you've already lost more than the foundation could ever give you." Walter stared at her, stunned. Jacob turned toward the door, but before he could reach it, Walter spoke, voice stripped of its grandeur. "Jacob, if you walk out now, you'll destroy this family." Jacob looked over his shoulder. "I'm not the one who broke it." He stepped into the hall. The grandfather clock rang again. The sound followed him as he walked toward the front door. Coat in hand, the weight of the Whitmore secrets settling like snow on his shoulders. Behind him, voices rose, Rebecca pleading, Daniel arguing, Marianne crying, Walter roaring, but the door closed on all of it, sealing him in the quiet winter air. The night was cold, the kind that made breath visible. Jacob exhaled once, watching the white cloud drift upward. He had come tonight to sign a document. Instead, he had walked into a war. What he didn't know, what no one inside that house knew, was that the war was about to expand far beyond the Whitmore estate. Because outside the wrought iron gate, a black SUV was idling engine, humming softly, a lone figure watching the front door through tinted glass, waiting for Jacob Miller to step into the open. The cold slapped Jacob in the face, the moment he stepped off the Whitmore driveway, a sharp winter wind slicing through his coat as if determined to chase him all the way back to his car. The estate behind him glowed like a cathedral on a hill, warm light spilling across manicured lawns, but the warmth felt false now, like a stage set struck after the final act. His footsteps crunched over the gravel in tight, steady beats, each one measured, each one louder than the last. He felt the weight of the night pressing against his ribs, but he kept walking, refusing to let his breath shake. He didn't notice the SUV at first. The black paint swallowed the streetlight glow, the engine barely audible under the whisper of wind. But as Jacob reached the end of the drive and fished in his pocket for his keys, a flicker of movement behind the tinted window caught his eye. The rear door opened. A woman stepped out. Tall, precise, wrapped in a charcoal coat that looked too thin for the weather, as if cold dared not touch her. Her heels clicked against the pavement, 3 quick taps before she stopped directly in his path. Mr. Miller. Her voice was low professional but laced with something sharper. Urgency or danger. Jacob straightened instinctively. "Who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lifted a gloved hand and opened a small leather folder. Inside, a silver badge gleamed in the dim light. Agent Lauren Childs, Financial Crimes Division. Jacob blinked. "Why would get in the car?" she said softly. "Please, we need to talk where no one can hear us." He glanced back at the mansion. Through the large windows he could see silhouettes moving, Rebecca and Daniel arguing, Walter pacing like a man cornered by his own shadow. Jacob felt torn for a moment, but something in Agent Childs's eyes steadied him. Not threat, not command. Resolve. And fear not for herself, but for what might happen if he refused. He slid into the SUV. Warm air hit him immediately, carrying the faint scent of leather and pine. Agent Childs followed him inside, closing the door quietly before signaling the driver, an older man with slate-grey hair and a jaw that rarely unclenched. The SUV rolled away from the curb with deliberate slowness, as if the road ahead might shatter under sudden force. Jacob turned toward her. "Why is Financial Crimes interested in me? I'm a high school teacher." "You are," she said, locking eyes with him. "But tonight you stepped into something far larger than you realize." Jacob's pulse ticked faster. "Is this about Walter Whitmore?" She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing how much truth he could carry at once. "What did Daniel tell you?" Jacob exhaled. "That there are irregularities in the foundation, missing funds, potential investigations." Agent Childs nodded once. More than irregularities. More than potential. His father's under federal review. Quiet review, but real. Whitmore Industries has been shifting assets across charitable subsidiaries, offshore trusts, and shell companies tied to environmental grants that don't exist. Jacob felt the air tighten. "Why tell me?" "Because," she said, leaning slightly closer, "you were never supposed to see that prenup. Not the real one. Walter used it to test whether you were a threat. He thought if you pushed back, it meant you might look deeper. And if you didn't, if you signed without question, he'd keep you close." Jacob stared. Close to what? A collapsing empire. Silence thudded between them. The SUV passed under a streetlight, illuminating her face. Sharp cheekbones, eyes lined with fatigue. This wasn't a woman chasing promotion. This was someone carrying the weight of a case too big for comfort. She continued, "Walter's afraid of you, Mr. Miller." Do you know why Jacob almost laughed? "I teach teenagers how to balance chemical equations. Why would a man like him fear me?" Because you have nothing to lose, she said, and men with power fear anyone they can't buy or bury. Her words hit like a stone dropped into still water. Jacob rubbed his hands together, trying to warm the numbness creeping into his fingers. What happens now? That depends on you, she replied. You're connected to the Whitmores through Rebecca, through the wedding, through appearances. If Walter trusts you, he'll keep speaking freely, and we need someone on the inside. Jacob stiffened. No, absolutely not. The SUV slowed slightly, as if echoing his shock. I'm not asking you to spy, she said calmly. I'm asking you to stay observant. You were already planning to marry into this family, was Jacob corrected sharply. Past tense. She watched him quietly. Is that final? Jacob didn't answer. He pictured Rebecca's face, earlier shocked, wounded, trembling under the weight of truths she'd never asked for. He pictured Ben waiting at home, his backpack by the door, his innocence, something Jacob guarded fiercely. Agent Childs folded her hands. Walter expects you to come back. If you cut ties now, he'll panic. When powerful men panic, they destroy evidence. They shut doors. They move money faster. She paused, letting the gravity settle. But if you stay in his orbit just a little longer, we might stop something that could harm hundreds of people. Jacob felt the words pierce him. Hundreds of people, not just a family, not just a fortune, a community, schools, hospitals, programs relying on the Foundation's grants. Agent Childs didn't pressure him. She didn't speak again for nearly half a minute, giving him space to think, a rare act of respect in a night full of manipulation. The SUV turned onto a quieter road, lined with bare trees whose branches clawed at the sky. The moonlight broke through in thin slices. Finally, Jacob whispered, If I agree, what do you need me to do? Nothing illegal, she said. Just stay close to Rebecca. Stay in the family's view. Let us know if Walter becomes unstable, if he changes behavior, if he tries to hide assets. And above all, if anyone threatens you or your son, you call me immediately. Jacob swallowed. Ben stays out of this. Of course, she said. But you have to understand, Walter plays hard when cornered. And he's very cornered. Jacob leaned his head back against the seat. The leather was warm, but the warmth felt detached like a borrowed comfort. Rebecca doesn't know, he said softly. She doesn't even know half of what her father is capable of. Agent Childs didn't comment. Is she part of the investigation? He asked. Childs shook her head. She's clean. And from what we can tell, she's been kept intentionally uninformed. Her voice lowered. Which means she may become a liability to him, not to us. Jacob felt a deep, protective ache swell in his chest. Rebecca wasn't perfect, but she didn't deserve this. She didn't choose to be part of whatever Walter was doing. She was simply raised in its shadow. The SUV slowed again, pulling to the curb beside a small community park. Frost frosted the swings. The empty basketball court gleamed under moonlight. Familiar. Just a few blocks from Jacob's home. He hadn't even noticed how close they'd come. The engine idled softly. Agent Childs reached into her coat and handed him a business card. The paper was thick, almost textured. Her handwritten number was on the back. Sleep on it. Call me in the morning. Whatever you choose, make it a clean choice. She opened her door, letting in a blast of cold air. Before stepping out, she added, And Jacob, you weren't dragged into this. You were targeted. There's a difference. The door shut. The SUV pulled away. Jacob stood alone, in the biting wind card in hand, watching the taillights disappear into darkness. For a long moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The night felt too big, too loud, too full of roads he had never meant to walk. Then slowly he turned toward home, toward the porch light he'd left on for Ben, toward a life that had just shifted under his feet. Behind him, the wind swept across the empty park, carrying the faint metallic scent of winter, a reminder of the night's fracture and the storm that was coming. Ben was asleep when Jacob pushed open the front door, his small sneakers neatly placed beside the rug, his school backpack leaning against the wall, like it had been waiting for someone to come home and carry the day with him. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that lived in modest neighborhoods after 9 at night. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the faint whistle of wind slipping through old window frames. Jacob closed the door softly, leaning against it for a moment, letting the warmth settle into his bones. But warmth couldn't settle the night. Not after the Whitmores. Not after Agent Childs. He hung up his coat and walked to Ben's room. The door was slightly ajar. He nudged it open with 2 fingers. Ben lay curled under a dinosaur blanket, one hand clutching the stuffed fox Jacob had bought at a yard sale when Ben was 3. His breathing was slow, steady, innocent. Jacob felt a weight rise in his chest, the kind that reminded him what mattered, what he protected, what lines he would never let anyone cross. He closed the door gently. In the kitchen he poured himself a glass of tap water, but his hands were trembling enough that the rim of the glass clinked against the faucet. He drank anyway. Cold water, warm house, turbulent mind. He sat at the small dining table, the laminate surface scratched from years of homework assignments and markers bleeding through worksheets. He stared out the window at the empty street. A car passed headlights sweeping over the houses before disappearing into the dark. His phone buzzed on the table face down. He didn't have to flip it over to know who it was. It would be Rebecca, maybe Daniel, maybe all of them. He let it buzz until the sound faded. Another buzz, this time a voicemail notification. He closed his eyes. The prenup, the argument, Walter's fury, Daniel's revelation, the SUV, the agent, the investigation. All of it swirled like a storm tightening its circle around him. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't wanted to become entangled in dynastic politics or federal investigations. He'd wanted a partner, a family, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of grief. His phone vibrated again. He flipped it over. Rebecca. He stared at her name glowing on the screen, then answered. Jacob. Her voice cracked the moment it came through the line, breathless, panicked like she'd been crying or running or both. Please don't hang up. Jacob pressed his thumb to the table edge. I'm listening. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know what my father was doing. I swear to you, Jacob, I had no idea about the investigation, the money, any of it. I believe you, he said, quietly. And he did. Rebecca wasn't ruthless. She was sheltered, raised behind the tinted windows of privilege, where truth came curated, softened, refined to preserve the family's image. But Jacob, she said, her voice, breaking, you walked out before I could talk to you. Before I could say that, I don't want to lose you over something I didn't choose. A soft sob caught in her throat. Can I come over? Please, Jacob hesitated. The wind outside rattled the kitchen window. He thought of Agent Childs, her warning about staying close, about keeping the Whitmore orbit intact. But he also thought of Rebecca, her trembling voice, the confusion in her eyes when the truth had exploded in front of her. He exhaled. All right, come over. But Rebecca, just you. No one else. I promise, she said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. 20 minutes? Enough time to question every choice ahead of him. Enough time to reconsider letting her walk through his door. Enough time to imagine Walter following her or sending someone else. Or he stopped himself. Fear wasn't going to lead tonight. He tidied the living room, straightened a stack of Ben's books, folded a blanket. Not because Rebecca cared, but because his nerves needed something to do. When the knock finally came, it was soft, almost timid. He opened the door. Rebecca stood on the porch, wrapped in a navy coat, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, her eyes swollen with exhaustion. The porch light cast her in a pale gold glow, making her look smaller than he'd ever seen her. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he said. She stepped inside and looked around the familiar, modest living room. She'd always liked it here. She'd called it warm, honest, lived in. Tonight, though, she seemed unsure of where to stand, like the house itself might judge her. "I don't know where to start," she murmured. "Start wherever you can," Jacob said. She sat on the couch, clasping her hands, tightly enough that her knuckles blanched. Daniel wasn't supposed to say anything. Dad didn't want anyone to know. Not the board, not the donors, not me. He said it was temporary, that he was protecting the foundation until things settled. "Is that what he told you?" Jacob asked. "Or what you needed to believe?" Rebecca flinched. "You think I wanted this?" she whispered. "You think I wanted to find out tonight that my father may have done something illegal, that my family, my whole life, is built on something I can't trust?" Jacob's silence was answer enough. She leaned forward. "Jacob, I know how this looks, but I'm not my father. I'm not a part of whatever he's doing." "I know," Jacob said softly, "but you're caught in it." She covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. "I don't know what to do." Jacob watched her for a long moment, the rise and fall of her breath, the tremor in her fingers. She wasn't acting. She wasn't manipulating. She was unraveling. "You didn't cause this," he said, "but you're going to have to decide who you are when the truth settles." She lifted her head, slowly, eyes glistening. "I want you," she said. "I want us. But if staying with me means getting pulled into this mess, I won't let that happen." Jacob swallowed. "It's not that simple." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." They sat in silence for several seconds before she added, "Daniel wants to meet with you. Alone." Jacob's brows drew together. Why he didn't say, just that it's important, and that you'd be safer hearing it from him. Jacob felt something cold coil low in his stomach. "Safer," Rebecca nodded. He said Dad isn't thinking clearly, that he's different lately. Paranoid, controlling. He's been shutting people out. Has he threatened anyone? Her breath hitched before she answered. He threatened Daniel. Not directly, but enough that Daniel's been sleeping at a hotel for the past week. A chill raced along Jacob's spine. Rebecca reached for his hand. "Jacob, whatever you decide, don't do it alone. Please." He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. "Where does Daniel want to meet?" "A diner near the interstate," she said. "Tomorrow, 9 in the morning." Jacob nodded slowly. Rebecca hesitated, then asked, "Can I stay for a few minutes? I just can't go home yet." He gestured to the couch. "Stay as long as you need." Rebecca curled into the corner of the sofa, pulling the blanket over her lap. Her breathing eventually steadied. Her eyes drifted closed. The storm outside softened to a whisper. Jacob watched her sleep. For a moment, she looked like the woman he'd once met under summer lights at a street festival, laughing free, untouched by shadows. But shadows had caught up now. Tomorrow he would meet Daniel. and one way or another, the truth would widen. The diner sat alone off the interstate like a relic from a quieter America, its neon sign flickering against the pale morning sky. Jacob pulled into the half-empty lot at 9 sharp, the tires crunching over thin patches of frost. Inside, the windows were fogged from the heat of the griddle, and the scent of coffee hung thick in the air. He spotted Daniel immediately. The man sat in a corner booth, shoulders hunched, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of him. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie missing his eyes, carrying the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days. Jacob slid into the seat across from him. "You said it was urgent." Daniel lifted his gaze slowly, as if dragging it from someplace dark. "It is." A waitress passed by with a pot of coffee. Jacob accepted a refill. Daniel didn't. He looked like caffeine would only make him shake harder. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel took a breath and said, "My father thinks you're a threat." Jacob let the word settle. "Because I refused to sign a predatory contract, no." Daniel shook his head. "Because you walked out without fear. He's not used to that. Most men who want entry into his world bend. You didn't. He doesn't know what to do with someone who can't be controlled." Jacob exhaled, steady and low. "Rebecca said he's been paranoid." "That's too soft," Daniel replied. "He's unraveling." Daniel ran a hand over his face, rubbing his temples as if fighting off the memory. 2 weeks ago, he asked me to move funds, large sums out of the foundation, into foreign accounts. When I refused, he told me he could remove obstacles. That was the word he used. Daniel swallowed hard. Obstacles. Jacob felt a cold knot twist in his chest. "Does Rebecca know that part?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "And she shouldn't." "Not yet." "Why involve me?" Jacob asked. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Because you're the only person my father didn't prepare for. Everyone else works for him, depends on him, owes him something. But you." Daniel's eyes flicked to Jacob's hands, steady around the coffee mug. "You come from outside his system. He doesn't understand how to predict you." Jacob stared back, unblinking. "You want me to spy on him?" Daniel gave a bitter, humorless smile. "I want you to stay alive." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Is he dangerous?" "Not in the way people think," Daniel murmured. "He doesn't lash out. He plans, he calculates. And when he believes someone might expose him," Daniel paused, looking down at the table, "he makes them disappear professionally. Reputations destroyed. Careers ended. Marriages sabotaged. He ruins people so quietly no one ever knows he was the cause." A chill slithered down Jacob's spine. "You think he'd do that to me?" "I think he already has," Daniel said. "He called the superintendent of your district yesterday." Jacob's breath halted. "For what? To inquire about your conduct at work. To ask whether any concerns had been filed. It wasn't direct, just enough to plant a seed." Jacob set his mug down slowly, the ceramic clicking against the table. "My job is the one thing I've held together since Anna died. He doesn't get to touch that." Daniel nodded, remorse flickering across his features. "Then you need to stay ahead of him." Jacob leaned back, studying the man across from him. "Tell me the truth, Daniel. Why are you really doing this? Why involve me at all?" Daniel hesitated. The diner buzzed with the scrape of forks on plates and the faint hum of a jukebox playing a faded country ballad. He looked almost boyish for a moment, tired, defeated, stripped of the Whitmore armor. "Because I've been covering for him for years," he said finally, "and I can't do it anymore." Jacob let the confession land between them. Daniel's voice cracked slightly when he continued. When my mother married him, she thought she was stepping into a legacy of integrity. But the truth is, most of the foundation's public impact has been smoke and mirrors. A lot of money goes where it shouldn't, and the few people who tried to question it. He looked toward the window, watching a semi rumble past on the interstate. They're not around anymore. You're talking about whistleblowers, Jacob said quietly. Daniel pressed his lips together. Families were paid off. Careers dismantled. My father uses lawyers like scalpels. Nothing illegal on paper, but devastating all the same. Jacob absorbed the words, feeling the gravity settle in his shoulders. So where do I fit into all this? Daniel folded his hands. The board has been discussing bringing in someone from outside the family to oversee the community programs. Someone with a clean reputation. Someone who looks like the future of the foundation. Someone who can restore faith when the truth inevitably surfaces. He paused. Your name came up. Jacob blinked, stunned. I've never even met the board. You don't have to, Daniel said. Your work speaks for itself. You're respected in the community. You're not driven by greed. You're everything my father no longer is. Jacob felt heat rise in his chest, not from pride, but disbelief. I'm a teacher. And that's why they trust you, Daniel replied. You represent the people the foundation claims to serve. When the storm hits, they'll need someone untainted to stand at the front. Jacob shook his head slowly. You're asking me to take on something that could destroy me. No, Daniel said softly. I'm warning you that you're already part of it, whether you want to be or not. Silence thickened between them. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the diner's windows. A truck horn echoed in the distance. The waitress approached again, refilling both cups, as though sensing the heaviness anchored to the table. Jacob finally broke the silence. If your father finds out we met, he won't, Daniel cut in. He's paranoid, but he still believes he controls his family. His gaze darkened. That's his blind spot. Jacob drank from his cup, letting the warmth spread through him. Rebecca is caught in the middle. Daniel exhaled heavily. I know. And she's the one I'm trying hardest to protect. Jacob looked sharply at him. From your father or from the truth, both, Daniel said, after a long pause. She's not ready to hear what he's capable of. And when everything collapses, she'll be pulled under, unless someone's there to hold her up. Emotion flickered behind his tired eyes. Guilt. Love. Regret. A lifetime of being the eldest child who carried burdens no one else could see. Jacob leaned forward. So what now? Daniel reached inside his jacket and slid a small envelope across the table. Inside is the contact for a journalist, someone discreet, ethical, and already looking into my father's dealings. If anything happens, if you're threatened, if your job is touched, if Ben is targeted, you call her. Not the police, not me, her. Jacob took the envelope, but didn't open it. You expect this to get worse? Daniel nodded once. Before it gets better. They sat quietly for several seconds, the diner's noise fading into the background. Then Jacob asked, Why me, Daniel? Among all the people your family knows, why choose me? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Because you're the only one my father can't predict, and the only one I trust more than him. Jacob held his gaze. The truth in the statement hit harder than any accusation from the night before. The two men stood at the same moment, as if guided by the same invisible cue. Daniel pulled out his wallet, left cash on the table, and extended a hand. Be careful, Jacob. Jacob shook it. You too. Daniel's grip tightened for a second, desperation disguised as resolve, before he released it and walked out into the cold morning shoulders, squared against the wind. Jacob stood watching him go, the envelope heavy in his pocket, a sense of inevitability settling around him like the approaching winter storm. He didn't know it yet, but before the week ended, the Whitmore investigation would explode into something far larger than a family scandal, and Jacob Miller would find himself standing in the center of a storm, powerful enough to break or remake everything he thought he understood about truth, loyalty, and legacy. Jacob spent the afternoon teaching chemical reactions to a classroom of restless teenagers, but not a single formula stuck in his mind. His voice moved on instinct, explaining oxidation and energy transfer, his hands guiding students through lab steps as if nothing in his life had shifted. But inside, something tightened with each passing hour. Every time the classroom door opened, his pulse jumped. Each unfamiliar car in the parking lot made him tense. Even the intercom buzz made him expect the superintendent to summon him with bad news planted by Walter Whitmore. When the final bell rang, the clatter of backpacks and hurried footsteps felt almost jarring. Students filed out, leaving behind faint traces of deodorant, cheap perfume, and the metallic tang of science equipment. Jacob gathered stray worksheets, wiped down counters, and stacked lab goggles. Routine, safe, familiar, all the things his life no longer was. He locked the lab door and walked the dim hallway, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. The school felt different today, emptier, as if it sensed something looming. Outside, the wind cut sharper than the night before, sweeping dry leaves across the pavement in hurried spirals. Jacob pulled his coat tighter around himself and headed toward his car. He had almost reached it when a voice behind him said, "Mr. Miller." He froze. The tone wasn't threatening, just tentative. He turned slowly. A student stood near the corner of the building, a girl with a tight ponytail, oversized sweatshirt, and eyes too old for her age. Emily Torres. Quiet in class, sharp-minded, always watching the world like it owed her explanations. Emily Jacob said, "What are you doing here? School ended an hour ago." She shifted her backpack higher on her shoulder. "My ride didn't show." Again. She glanced at the empty road with defeated familiarity. Mum's working a double. Jacob nodded. He knew the story, single mum bills stacking up a daughter holding more stress than any teenager should. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" "No." Emily hesitated. "Actually, I heard something today." The wind picked up, rustling her hair, carrying the faint scent of snow. Jacob frowned. "What did you hear?" Emily bit her lip, then stepped closer. "I was in the main office before lunch. The superintendent was on the phone. She didn't see me, but I heard your name." Ice slid down Jacob's spine. Emily continued, voice low. "She said someone called asking about your conduct, asking if you had, any incidents or problems with students." Emily's brow furrowed. It sounded like they were trying to get you in trouble. Jacob's throat tightened. Did she say who called? No. But she looked annoyed. She said whoever it was asked the same questions twice. Jacob exhaled slowly. So Daniel had been right. Emily glanced at his car. "Mr. Miller, are you in trouble?" Jacob forced a small smile. "No, Emily. But thank you for telling me. Really. You're one of the good teachers," she muttered, staring at her shoes. People shouldn't mess with good teachers. He didn't trust his voice enough to answer. "I'll walk home," she said quietly. "It's only a mile." "I'll drive you," Jacob said immediately. "It's cold and getting dark." She nodded, almost relieved, and they climbed into his car. The drive was quiet. Emily stared out the window. Jacob watched the road, but his mind moved elsewhere, spooling through possibilities, weighing choices, repeating Agent Childs' warning. When he dropped Emily off at her small rental duplex, she hesitated before closing the door. "Whatever's happening," she said softly, "I hope you don't quit. People like me need teachers like you." Jacob swallowed hard. "I'm not quitting." She gave a faint smile and disappeared inside. He stayed parked for a moment, gripping the wheel until his fingers ached. The world outside felt colder. Not winter cold. Something deeper. He turned the key. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw Rebecca's car already there, parked neatly, engine-off windows fogged. She must have been waiting a while. Inside the house, Ben sat at the kitchen table, coloring a half-eaten apple beside him. He looked up with a bright smile the moment Jacob entered. "Dad, look, I drew a volcano." Jacob ruffled his hair, forcing his breath to steady. "That's awesome, buddy." Rebecca stood near the counter, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked different than last night, more composed but guarded. Like someone rehearsing words, she still wasn't sure she had the right to speak. "Thank you for letting me stay yesterday," she said quietly. "I didn't want to leave things the way they were." Jacob nodded, hanging up his coat. "I'm glad you felt safe here." Her eyes softened. "I always feel safe here." They sat at the table with Ben chattering about science fair projects. Rebecca listened, smiling, asking him questions, her voice gentle. But her eyes flickered to Jacob, searching for something in the gaps of his expression. When Ben ran to his room to grab another drawing, she leaned in. "Are you meeting Daniel again?" "I already did," Jacob said. She inhaled sharply, and Jacob struggled for a moment, choosing his words. "He's not just worried about your father. He's worried about the foundation. And about you." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her mug. "I didn't want any of this, Jacob." "I know," he said. "But your family is collapsing from the inside." She looked down at the table, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix something I didn't break." Jacob reached across the table, touching her wrist lightly. "You're not responsible for your father's actions. But you are responsible for what you do now." Before she could respond, Ben barreled back into the room, waving a new drawing. They both snapped into smiles, folding their conversation away like something fragile that needed temporary protection. After dinner, the simple kind Jacob always made on weeknights, Rebecca helped Ben put away his toys. She moved through the small house with a tenderness that made Jacob ache. He saw glimpses of the life he'd imagined. The life he feared was slipping further away with every revelation. When Ben finally fell asleep, Rebecca stood by the doorway of his room, watching him with a quiet expression. "He trusts you completely," she whispered. Jacob nodded. "I have to protect him." "I know," she said, "and I'd never let anyone hurt him. Or you." He studied her carefully. "Your father tried to go after my job." Rebecca closed her eyes. "Daniel told me." She opened them again, and there was fire there, anger sharp enough to blister. "I confronted Dad before I came here. He denied nothing. Said it was necessary." Her voice shook. "Necessary." Jacob exhaled slowly. Rebecca stepped closer. "Jacob, if staying with me puts you or Ben in danger, tell me, I'll walk away. I'll end everything. I won't let my family ruin your life." Her voice cracked, but her stance was firm. Strong. He stared at her, floored by the raw sincerity in her eyes. "Rebecca," he said softly, "that's not what I want." "What do you want?" she whispered. Jacob didn't answer immediately. He looked around the house, the photos of Ben, the homemade ceramic bowl he kept keys in the worn couch where he'd fallen asleep, grading papers more times than he could count. His real life. His real world. "I want the truth," he said. Rebecca nodded, tears glistening but not falling. "Then I'll help you find it." Jacob stepped closer. The air between them tightened, warm, uncertain, fragile. But before either could speak again, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Jacob froze. Rebecca's breath hitched. The knock came again, firmer, urgent. Jacob crossed the living room slowly, each step deliberate. He glanced through the peephole. A man stood on the porch. Not Daniel. Not Walter. A stranger in a black coat. But the badge clipped to his belt made Jacob's pulse spike. Federal agent. Another one. And this one did not look like he came to talk. Jacob opened the door 2 inches. "Can I help you?" The agent lifted his chin slightly. "Mr. Miller, we need to speak with you." "Now." Jacob felt Rebecca step behind him. The agent's eyes shifted from Jacob to her, then back. "It's about the Whitmore investigation," he said. Jacob's throat tightened. "I've already spoken with Agent Childs." The man's brows pulled together. "Agent Childs?" "Yes," Jacob said slowly. "Last night." The agent stared at him, silent for several seconds. Then his voice dropped to a chilling, measured tone. "Mr. Miller, there is no Agent Childs assigned to this investigation." The room behind Jacob seemed to tilt. Rebecca gripped the back of his shirt. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the night split open. For a long moment, Jacob couldn't move. The cold from the open door seeped into his skin, into his bones, into the space between one heartbeat and the next. The man on the porch waited unmoving, his expression steady, but not hostile, at least not yet. His eyes sharp beneath the brim of his coat, flicked briefly toward Rebecca, then back to Jacob, with a quiet, assessing focus. "Sir," he repeated, "I need you to step outside." Jacob's hand tightened on the door. "Not until you tell me who the hell Agent Childs is." The agent slipped a hand into his coat. Rebecca tensed behind Jacob's fingers, gripping his arm like she was anchoring herself. But the man didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he produced a leather identification wallet, flipped it open, and held it steady in the porch light. "Special Agent Thomas Reeve," he said, "Deputy Field Supervisor. Financial Crimes and Organized Corruption. Task Force." The credentials looked legitimate, heavy, not the flimsy kind used by scammers. The badge bore a serial number, etched so finely, the porch light glinted off it in a slow sweep. Still, Jacob didn't open the door any wider. "There's no Agent Childs?" Jacob asked again. "No one by that name in this division," Reeve said. "No one assigned to any Whitmore case. No one operating under that alias." His voice dropped. "If someone approached you claiming to be federal law enforcement, we need to know now." Jacob's pulse pounded inside his ears. The night with the SUV, the badge, the precise tone, the way she knew things she shouldn't have known. He replayed every second of the conversation, looking for cracks he hadn't noticed. They widened all at once. Rebecca whispered, "Jacob, what does this mean?" Agent Reeve's expression sharpened. "It means whoever contacted you is not federal. And wherever that person got their information, they're operating outside the law." Jacob exhaled through clenched teeth. I believed her. "You aren't the first," Reeve said gently. "These people are highly trained. They know what to say, how to say it." Jacob opened the door wider, stepping out onto the porch. "Then tell me what's going on." Reeve hesitated for only a second, then nodded. "Get a coat. This conversation can't happen here." Jacob grabbed his jacket, pausing only to tell Rebecca, "Stay with Ben." Lock the door behind me. Her eyes widened with fear. "Jacob, I'll be back soon. I promise." She swallowed hard, then nodded and closed the door, sliding the deadbolt with a heavy click. Reeve led Jacob to a government sedan parked across the street. The windows were fogged from the cold. Jacob slid into the passenger seat, while Reeve rounded the hood and got behind the wheel. The interior smelled faintly of coffee and winter air. The HVAC hummed to life, melting frost from the windshield. Reeve didn't speak at first. He watched the street, the quiet houses, lined under the yellow glow of street lamps. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "We've been monitoring the Whitmore Foundation for several months. Irregularities in reporting, missing grant funds, oversight failures. But we haven't gone public because, frankly, we don't have enough yet." "Daniel told me something similar," Jacob murmured. Reeve nodded. "Daniel's been our unofficial eyes on the inside for nearly a year." Jacob stiffened. "What he didn't tell you? Interesting." Reeve tapped a finger on the steering wheel. He's been trying to expose his father quietly, but someone inside the organization has been interfering. Every time he sent us files, someone erased traces before they reached us. "You think I'm being targeted by the same person?" Jacob asked. Reeve's silence answered for him. Jacob leaned forward. "So who the hell was Agent Childs?" Reeve turned to him, eyes dark. "Someone with access to privileged information. Someone who knew about the audit, the offshore accounts, the board tensions. Someone who knew you were at the estate last night." Jacob felt a slow, creeping dread. "You think she works for Walter?" "We don't know." Reeve shook his head. "Walter is sloppy, but he's not reckless. If he wanted to approach you, he wouldn't use a fake badge." Jacob's mind raced. Then who would Reeve inhaled sharply, choosing his next words with care? There's a faction within the Whitmore network. Private security, advisors, contractors who operate without formal titles. They've been hired to protect the family legacy at any cost. Jacob's stomach twisted. "You're saying she might be one of them?" "She might be," Reeve said. "Or she might be working against them." "That means she could be trying to protect me," Jacob argued. "Or manipulate you," Reeve countered. "Or both." Jacob raked a hand through his hair. His pulse thudded against his temples. "You said Daniel was your contact. Why didn't he warn me about this?" Reeve hesitated. "Daniel hasn't checked in for 48 hours. The last message we got from him was vague. He said he had something Jacob needed to hear." And then nothing. A cold ripple slid through Jacob's chest. "Something's happened to him." "We don't know that yet," Reeve said calmly, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the lie. Jacob stared at the windshield. A snowflake drifted across the glass, melting into a slow bead. Reeve pulled a file from the center console and set it gently on Jacob's lap. "This is everything we have so far. Background on the accounts, names of subsidiaries, shell companies traced to the Cayman Islands." Jacob barely heard him. His breath caught on a thought that felt too sharp, too dangerous. "Why me?" Jacob asked quietly. "Why would anyone from the Whitmore circle target me?" Reeve met his eyes. "Because you're marrying the daughter of a man under investigation. Because you don't benefit from their money. Because you're not compromised. Because your reputation is clean. Because if you turn on them, people will believe you." Jacob swallowed. "So they want me scared. They want you compliant," Reeve corrected, "or silent." A tremor rolled through Jacob's chest, not fear but something harder. Anger, resolve. "So what now?" he asked. Reeve studied him for a long moment. "Now, Mr. Miller, you have to decide who you trust. The woman who came to you last night. The man who met you this morning. The family you walked away from." or us. Jacob didn't respond, his breath fogged in the cool air. Reeve continued, "But one thing is certain. The moment you stepped out of Walter Whitmore's house, you became a piece on the board. You don't get to leave the game anymore." Jacob stared at the quiet street, the faint glow of his living room window, the shadow of Rebecca pacing behind the curtains. He exhaled slowly. "If someone's watching me, does that mean Rebecca is in danger, too?" Reeve's gaze hardened. "Everyone connected to Walter is in danger." Jacob's jaw clenched. "Then help me protect her." Reeve paused. "Is that what you want?" Even after everything, Jacob looked down at his hands. Hands that had held chalk and test tubes and his son's tiny fingers. Hands that had once held Rebecca's face under street fair lights. Hands that had lived a simple life until the Whitmores dragged him into their storm. "Yes," Jacob said, finally. "I want her safe." Reeve nodded. "Then you need to hear something else. Something Daniel tried to tell us before he disappeared." He reached into his coat and produced a folded slip of paper. "This was delivered to our office anonymously this morning." He handed it to Jacob. Jacob unfolded the note slowly. The handwriting was tight, slanted, rushed. She doesn't know what her father hid, but when she finds out, she won't forgive him. Or herself. "Protect her. Don't trust anyone who contacts you first." Jacob's breath caught. Reeve watched him carefully. "Do you know who wrote it?" Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." It was Rebecca's mother. Marianne. The woman who had stood silent at the estate, her eyes full of a grief she hadn't spoken. Reeve leaned back. Then the game just changed. Jacob closed the note, feeling the weight of it settle into his palm. For the first time since this began, another truth surfaced, a truth colder than the winter night pressing at the car windows. Walter Whitmore wasn't the only one hiding something, and the most dangerous secret wasn't his. It was hers. Jacob sat in the passenger seat long after Agent Reeve finished speaking, the silence stretching between them like a thin wire ready to snap. The note from Marianne weighed heavy in his hand, the edges slightly crumpled from his tightening grip. Outside the street remained still, porch lights, glowing curtains drawn a quiet neighborhood, oblivious to the storm shifting inside the car. The words on the paper pulsed in his mind, each line cutting deeper than the last. "Protect her. Don't trust anyone who contacts you first." Rebecca's mother had written that. A woman who had barely spoken in the Whitmore mansion. A woman who had seemed resigned, almost fragile. But fragile women didn't send anonymous warnings to federal agencies. Fragile women didn't risk the wrath of men like Walter Whitmore. Marianne had known something big enough to break her silence, something big enough to put her at risk. And now Jacob needed to figure out what that was. Reeve cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, we need to move quickly. If Daniel is missing, and an imposter agent has already approached you, time isn't on our side." Jacob stared straight ahead. "What's the next step? That depends," Reeve said evenly. "Do you want to remain involved? Once you commit, you can't walk this back without consequences." Jacob didn't hesitate. "I'm already involved." Reeve nodded once sharply. "Then listen carefully." But before he could continue, a flash of headlights swept across the street. A car turned onto Jacob's block, slow, deliberate, unfamiliar. Jacob stiffened. Reeve slid lower in his seat, studying the vehicle with a trained gaze. The car passed Jacob's house, then circled the cul-de-sac without ever fully stopping. Reeve murmured, "Black sedan. No plates on the front. Tinted windows. Has it been here before? Never, Jacob whispered. The sedan paused at the stop sign for a few seconds too long. Then it rolled away. Reeve exhaled, eyes still narrowed. Could be nothing. Could be everything. But you need to be cautious from here forward. Jacob nodded, trying to slow the pounding of his heart. You were saying Reeve refocused. We need evidence. Real evidence. Transfer logs, emails, internal memos, anything that proves Walter and his network misappropriated funds. Without documents, we can't stop him. Jacob turned his head slowly. You want me to get those? No, Reeve said. I want you to help us get close enough to know where to look. You have access to the family through Rebecca. You understand their routines, their dynamics. You can see what we can't. Jacob let out a breath that felt like it scraped his lungs. If Walter finds out, he won't. Reeve said firmly. We'll guide you. You won't be alone. But Agent Childs had said the same thing, and she didn't even exist. Jacob's chest tightened. What if Rebecca is in more danger than we think? Reeve turned his head, meeting his gaze. Then the sooner we uncover the truth, the safer she becomes. Jacob ran a hand across his face. I need to talk to her. Do not tell her about the investigation, Reeve warned. Not yet. Not until we understand her involvement. She's not involved, Jacob said sharply. You believe that, Reeve replied calmly. I'm asking you to wait for proof. Jacob didn't answer. His jaw set stubborn, but not reckless. Reeve watched him for a moment, then reached for the gear shift. I'll be in touch, Reeve said. But remember, if anyone approaches you again, claiming to be law enforcement, assume danger until proven otherwise. Jacob's fingers curled around the door handle. What about Daniel? Reeve paused. We'll find him. It didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a hope. Jacob stepped out of the car and crossed the street, each step heavier than the last. When he reached his front door, he saw Rebecca through the window, pacing the living room, arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. He unlocked it quietly. She spun around. Jacob thanked God. She rushed toward him, but stopped short when she saw his face. What happened? Jacob hung his coat on the hook with deliberate slowness. We need to talk. Rebecca's breath stilled. About what? About someone who came to see me, he said. A woman claiming to be a federal agent. Rebecca blinked. Claiming she wasn't real. Jacob said softly. She wasn't with the government. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Then who was she? Jacob shook his head. I don't know. Her hand trembled as she covered her mouth. Jacob, what did she want? To warn me about your father, Jacob said. To pull me into something, to make me trust her. He locked eyes with her. She knew things, Rebecca. Things no outsider should know. A single tear traced down her cheek. My God. Jacob stepped closer. Rebecca, has anyone in your family's Orbit security advisors, lawyers contacted you recently? Someone you didn't recognize? She shook her head, strands of hair slipping loose. No. But I've seen people around the house. Men I don't know. Dad said they were consultants. He wouldn't tell me more. Jacob swallowed. Your mother sent a warning. Rebecca froze. My mother, Jacob, pulled the folded note from his pocket. Her hands shook as she opened it. The moment her eyes scanned the handwriting, her knees nearly buckled. Jacob caught her by the elbow. She wrote this. Rebecca whispered. Yes. Rebecca clutched the note, her voice breaking. Jacob, my mother doesn't do things like this. She follows rules. She supports my father no matter what. For her to send something like this, she must be terrified. Jacob held her steady. Which means we need to find out what she knows. Rebecca looked up slowly. There was fear in her eyes. But beneath that resolve, something in her had shifted since the night in the mansion. Something bracing, hardened, awake. "My father is hiding something from me," she said quietly. "Yes. And my mother knows. Yes." Rebecca wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Then I want the truth. All of it. No matter how ugly." Jacob hesitated. "Rebecca, this path could put you in danger." She lifted her chin. "I'm already in danger. I just didn't know it." The room fell silent. Then Rebecca said something that surprised him. "I need to see my mother." Jacob frowned. "Tonight, yes," Rebecca said, already reaching for her coat. "Before my father realizes I'm asking questions." Jacob grabbed her arm. "You can't go alone." She looked at him, eyes fierce despite the trembling in her hand. "I wasn't planning to." Jacob stared at her heart, hammering. Then he nodded once. "Let's go." But as they stepped outside, Jacob's breath caught. A black sedan was parked 2 houses down. The same one. Its engine was running. And this time the driver's window lowered an inch, enough for Jacob to see the faint outline of someone watching them. Rebecca whispered, "Jacob," who is that Jacob didn't answer, because he already knew one thing, whoever sat in that car. They weren't here for Walter. They were here for them. The sedan didn't move. The engine hummed steadily, exhaust drifting in slow white ribbons across the curb. Jacob felt Rebecca stiffen beside him, her hand tightening around the strap of her purse. The quiet street, lined with bare trees and dim porch lights, suddenly felt claustrophobic, like the world had narrowed to this one moment, this one watcher, this one choice. Jacob stepped forward first. Just one step. Testing. The sedan's headlights flickered on then off again, deliberate, controlled, as if acknowledging him. Rebecca whispered, "Jacob, please don't." He reached back, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "Get inside the car," he said softly. "We're not backing down." She hesitated, fear widening her eyes, but trust steadied them. She nodded and moved toward his vehicle, unlocking the passenger side with trembling hands. The sedan didn't move. Jacob exhaled, slid into the driver's seat, and turned on the ignition. The engine rumbled beneath him, familiar and grounding. He watched the sedan in the rearview mirror as he pulled away from the curb. It followed. Not too close. Not far enough to ignore. He took the second turn toward the main road. The sedan followed. Rebecca clutched the note from her mother in her lap. "Jacob, what if this isn't about my father? What if this is about the woman who showed up last night?" Jacob kept his eyes on the road. Then she wasn't working alone. A stoplight glowed red at the intersection. Jacob slowed. The sedan slowed behind them. He glanced sideways at Rebecca. Her breathing had quickened short and shallow. "If we're being followed," she said, "we can't go to my parents' house. Dad would know immediately, and whoever is tailing us might be working for him or against him. I don't know which is worse." Jacob drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "Then where do we meet your mother?" A long pause. Then Rebecca whispered, "There's a place she goes when she needs to think. Somewhere my father never steps foot." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Where the stained glass chapel behind St. Alda's Hospital," she said. "She volunteers there twice a week. Dad hates hospitals. He hates anything that reminds him of mortality." Jacob made a sharp turn onto the state road, the sedan a steady shadow in his rear-view mirror. "Do you think she'll be there now? If she's afraid," Rebecca said, voice cracking, "then yes." The light turned green. Jacob accelerated. Through the windshield, the city lights shimmered against the low clouds. The wind pushed harder, rattling the branches overhead. The sedan followed at the same distance, unwavering. Rebecca wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. "Jacob, when you saw her last night, what exactly did this fake agent say?" Jacob felt anger edge into his voice, not at Rebecca, but at the memory itself. "She said there were irregularities in the foundation, that your father was being investigated, that they needed me inside your family circle." Rebecca frowned. She knew about the prenup. She quoted parts of it. Rebecca's eyes widened. Then she had access to documents inside the estate, or someone inside gave them to her. Jacob nodded grimly. "And whoever she is, she wasn't surprised that I walked out on your father. She expected it, like she was counting on it." The car went quiet, except for the low hum of the road. Snowflakes scattered across the windshield like static. After several miles of silence, Rebecca spoke again. "My mother once told me something about my father. It was years ago. I must have been 16. She said, 'Your father is a man who believes control is safety, but control can become its own sickness.' I didn't understand then." "And now?" Jacob asked gently. Rebecca stared at her hands. "Now I think she was warning me." As they approached the city limits, Jacob cut across lanes and took an exit toward the hospital district. The neon cross of St. Alders flickered against the night sky. Behind it, the chapel stood partially hidden among old trees, small rustic, its stained glass windows glowing faintly with warm amber light. But just as Jacob turned into the narrow drive, the sedan behind them accelerated fast. Rebecca gasped. "Jacob, I see it!" The sedan closed the distance in seconds. Jacob braked hard. The sedan screeched to a stop beside them, cutting off the only exit. Jacob's pulse hammered. Rebecca grabbed his arm. "Don't get out! Please don't get out!" Jacob reached for his phone, but before he could dial, the sedan's rear door opened. A figure stepped out. Not a man. A woman. Tall, controlled, wrapped in that same charcoal coat. Agent Childs. Jacob's breath locked in his chest. She approached slowly, palms open as if walking toward a frightened animal. Her expression was composed, her eyes calm. "Too calm," Rebecca whispered. "Jacob, that's her." Jacob slid out of the car, shutting the door behind him, with a decisive thud. "You're not federal. Who sent you, Walter?" "Someone else." Childs shook her head, once almost pitying. "Mr. Miller, if you'd just listened last night, you wouldn't be in this position." Jacob took a step forward. "What position is that?" Childs tilted her head. "One where the wrong people think you know more than you do." The wind surged between them. Snowflakes stung Jacob's face. Rebecca stepped out, too unable to stay in the car. "Why are you following us? What do you want?" Childs's gaze softened when it landed on Rebecca. "You shouldn't be here. This isn't your fight yet." "Then whose fight is it?" Rebecca demanded. Childs let out a slow breath. "Your father hired a private investigative unit years ago. Off the books. They don't answer to him anymore. They answer to whoever pays most. And right now, someone else is paying for what Jacob asked. To keep the Whitmore family intact," she said, "by eliminating destabilizing factors." Cold dread slid down Jacob's spine. "Meaning me." Childs didn't deny it. Rebecca stumbled closer to Jacob. "You said you were helping. You said you were warning him." "I was," Childs replied. "But warnings only work if they're heard." Jacob clenched his fists. "Why tell me any of this now?" Childs stepped closer. "Because the people tailing you tonight weren't me. I intercepted them." Jacob blinked. "Then who the hell are they?" Childs' eyes hardened. People who intend to take you somewhere far less welcoming than this chapel. People who don't give warnings. A chill blew down the narrow drive. Rebecca's voice cracked. My mother is inside. If she's in danger, Childs raised a hand. She's safer than you think. She's not who they're hunting tonight. Jacob stepped forward. Then who? Childs's gaze lifted past him. He turned. A second black sedan rolled into view. Much larger. Much darker. Much closer. Childs whispered, "Them." Rebecca grabbed Jacob's coat, pulling him backward. The chapel bell tolled once in the distance, a hollow, lonely sound. The second sedan accelerated. Headlights flared. Childs shouted, "Run!" Jacob grabbed Rebecca's hand. The world narrowed to footsteps, breath cold, and the approaching roar of a car that was not slowing down. Jacob pulled Rebecca with him toward the dim side entrance of the chapel, their feet pounding against the frozen pavement, breath rising in quick white bursts. The second sedan surged forward, engine roaring, as its headlights sliced through the narrow drive. Childs darted to the side hands, signaling frantically for them to move faster. The car didn't swerve. It aimed. Jacob's grip tightened around Rebecca's hand as he yanked her hard towards the shadowed cornerstone of the chapel. Tires screeched. The sedan skidded, barely missing them by inches as it slammed into a patch of ice and fishtailed violently, metal scraping against the stone curb. Rebecca stumbled, caught herself on Jacob's arm, her face pale with shock. Before either could regain footing, Childs appeared beside them, ushering them through the chapel door with fierce urgency. Inside the space was dim only a few wall sconces glowing against stained glass, casting fractured colors across the worn wooden pews. The air smelled of old wood polish and winter coats left too long in storage. "Move to the back," Childs hissed, shutting the door silently, but swiftly. "There's a service hall that leads toward the hospital. If we're lucky, they won't enter." Rebecca's voice trembled. "My mother. She isn't here." Childs said softer now. "She hasn't been here since noon." Rebecca swayed slightly, caught between fear and betrayal. Jacob steadied her by the elbow, guiding her toward the aisle. Childs scanned the windows, her hand hovering near her coat, as though reaching for a weapon Jacob was almost certain she carried even without federal authority. A sudden thud against the exterior made Rebecca gasp. Footsteps scraped outside, slow, methodical circling like predators testing a fence. Jacob's pulse hammered. The chapel walls felt too thin, the shadows too open. Childs crouched beneath one of the windows. Two men. Not Whitmore's regulars. These are contractors. Professionals? Jacob swallowed hard. "How did they find us?" "They were already tracking you," she whispered. "I intercepted the first tail, but the second they must have switched cars." Rebecca pressed closer to Jacob, her voice nearly silent. "Why us?" Why tonight? Childs didn't answer immediately. She watched the shadow outside drift past the stained glass. Because something in the Whitmore network ruptured today. Someone tipped the wrong people off, and someone else is trying to erase witnesses. Jacob felt the air leave his lungs. Daniel. Childs looked at him sharply. "You heard from him again?" "No," Jacob said. "But the last thing he told me was that he had something I needed to hear. Something about the board. Something dangerous." Childs' expression darkened with understanding. If he uncovered evidence, real evidence, those hired to silence him won't stop until they find every person he spoke to. A crack echoed through the chapel. Not a gunshot. A door hinge. The men outside had found the side entrance. Childs motioned urgently. "Go!" Now. Jacob guided Rebecca toward the back of the chapel. Their footsteps whispered across the old floorboards. Behind them, Childs remained near the front, buying seconds. Maybe minutes. The sound of the side door giving way rippled through the air, a violent punch to the silence. Rebecca's breath hitched. Jacob pulled her into the narrow service hallway, lined with devotional pamphlets and cleaning supplies. At the end was a push door leading to the hospital courtyard. He shoved it open, the cold night flooding in again. "Don't stop, Jacob," said voice, low but firm. "Keep moving." They stepped into the courtyard, just as a shout burst from the chapel behind them. Heavy footsteps followed. Childs shouted something, a warning, maybe a distraction, but her voice blurred with the sudden rush of fear driving Jacob and Rebecca forward. Snow coated the courtyard benches and the stone fountain in thin white layers. Their footsteps left stark footprints as they ran past the silent emergency ward windows and toward the loading dock behind the hospital. A truck engine rumbled somewhere in the darkness. A security light flickered. Rebecca clutched Jacob's sleeve, breath shuddering. "Jacob, they'll catch us." "No," he said. "Not if we keep going." But before they reached the far gate, a figure stepped from behind a dumpster. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. Jacob skidded to a halt, pulling Rebecca behind him. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone felt like a locked door. Then he raised one hand, empty, open, not threatening. "Mr. Miller," the man said quietly. "You need to come with me." Jacob shook his head firmly. "Not without explaining who you are." The man took a slow step forward. "I'm here on behalf of Daniel Whitmore." Rebecca stiffened. "Daniel? Where is he? Is he safe?" The man hesitated. It was the smallest detail, the briefest pause, but it made Jacob's blood turn cold. "He's alive," the man said carefully. "And he sent me to protect you." Jacob narrowed his eyes. Then why were others chasing us? The man didn't blink. Different agenda, different employer. Rebecca's fingers dug into Jacob's coat. "Jacob, this doesn't feel right." Jacob agreed. Everything about the man's calmness felt out of sync with the chaos closing in behind them. "If Daniel sent you," Jacob said, "what did he want to tell me?" What did he find? The man glanced toward the chapel. Shouts echoed faintly. Childs's voice cut through sharp and strained. The man turned back. "This isn't the place for answers." Jacob stepped sideways, shielding Rebecca. "Then tell me something simple. Tell me Daniel's middle name." The man didn't hesitate this time. Daniel Whitmore doesn't have one. It was true, and yet Jacob didn't move. The wind howled across the courtyard. Snow flurried harder. The sky pressed low over the hospital roof. The man extended his hand again. "We don't have long. If you want to survive tonight, come now." Rebecca looked at Jacob, fear trembling through her voice. "Jacob, what do we do?" Behind them, another door slammed. More voices. Closer now. Jacob's mind raced. Reeve hadn't mentioned sending backup. Childs had said there were multiple factions. Daniel was missing, and this man stood alone, no badge, no identification, just a claim and perfect timing. He met Rebecca's gaze and whispered, "I trust the doubt more than the promise." Rebecca nodded, breath trembling. Jacob grabbed her hand and ran. The man cursed, lunging forward, but Jacob veered behind a row of supply crates, pulling Rebecca through the gap between the loading dock and the maintenance shed. A narrow alley stretched ahead, barely lit by a sputtering light. They sprinted through it, boots slipping on ice, Jacob bracing Rebecca when she faltered. Behind them, footsteps thundered. Shouts rose. Someone yelled, "Don't let them reach the front." The alley opened into a side street near the emergency entrance. A lone ambulance idled there, its lights off its cabin empty. Jacob dragged Rebecca toward it. "Get in," he said, pulling the back door open. They climbed inside just as a group of dark silhouettes spilled into the street. Jacob shut the door softly and crouched with Rebecca behind a metal cabinet of supplies. Their breath fogged in the dim cold. Outside, the men's voices grew louder. Rebecca's whisper trembled. "How long until they find us?" Jacob didn't answer. He didn't know. A shadow passed beneath the ambulance's window. Another. They were close enough that Jacob could hear their breathing. Then suddenly the siren blared. The ambulance lurched forward. Rebecca clutched Jacob's arm in panic. Jacob pushed aside the curtain just enough to see the driver. Agent Reeve. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Jacob exhaled shakily as the ambulance sped into the night, the men shrinking into distant silhouettes behind them. Rebecca leaned into him, her shoulders trembling. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Inside the ambulance, the truth felt closer, sharper, heavier than ever. And if you've been following this story, if you've felt every twist tightening like a vice, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment 3 words, "I'm still here."